Well, today we're going to be talking about, the smart job site, as you know. What is a smart job site? To give you a little background on myself first, so that you know where I'm coming from on my perspective. My name is Isaac Barlow. I'm the CEO and founder of BusyBusy, which is a technology company that focuses on gathering the variable data for construction projects, basically gathering the data that we need to make better decisions. My background prior to that is I grew up in the construction industry, about 20 years in construction business management. So, and they're primarily in land development or excavation type company. And it was my passion for collecting data and trying to have data drive profit decisions that led me to the founding of BusyBusy. In addition to that, today I'm also the managing partner of a development company in St. George, Utah that we're doing kind of mass urban development. It's about $1 billion project over 15 years that we're doing 2,400 multifamily units, about 1 million feet of commercial and 250,000 feet of residential and 600 key of hotels. So it's a nice urban development combined. So my passion really is construction systems and management. And I kind of get involved in all of that. The exciting thing about this project that I'm referring to in Southern Utah is I kind of get to start testing and running test cases on all these concepts because I believe they really have a great impact on the industry. And so I'll go into a lot of that today. So we're going to go over the problem construction has, is it time for a new method, the big ideas, the trends in the industry, what is a smart job site, is it easy to get, and what's the shift we have to make to get that kind of data. So just so I can understand the audience a little better here, can I ask you a couple questions? Like, can you raise your hand if you're a general contractor versus a subcontractor? How many of you in the audience are general contractors? Okay. And how about subcontractors? Do we have subcontractors in the audience? Just two of you? Okay. And then other industries, what are the other industries or trades we have here?
I'm a developer, apartment REIT, with an apartment REIT for developing apartments.
Okay, and so you build the apartment buildings?
It's everything, land acquisition through to turnover to operations. We own and operate also.
Excellent, that's wonderful. I would love to talk to you after and just get some ideas, because that's great. Anyone else that has anything different than general contractor or trade?
Generally the same thing, but for the government in Canada.
Okay, great.
Develop size.
Okay. And then to get an idea about the size of businesses that you operate, who in here is below $1 million annual, like 0 to 1 million annual? Anybody? 8 million, that range? How about 1 to 5 million annual revenue? 1 to 5 million? Okay. And then over 5 million is everyone else?
We can't talk about revenue because we don't build to sell.
Right.
We don't own and operate, but the cost of construction is in excess of the margin you're talking about. And
that's what I'm mainly wondering, just so I can get an idea of the volume of work that you deal with. And so, do we have people in here that deal with over 100 million annual in construction costs? Okay, great. That helps me understand a little bit better. Next question is, how many of you have employees? Okay. And over 20 employees? A couple of you? Okay, great. Over 50 or 100 employees? Great. Okay, that's awesome. That helps me to get a better idea of the audience. Okay, so how many of you believe there's a lot of waste in the construction industry? That we have a fair amount of waste. Just a little bit, right? We waste a little bit. I actually believe we're an extremely wasteful industry. You know, part of my background is I'm basically the kind of nerd that when I grew up in construction because that was the family business, but I would basically study all my job sites at the end of every day. I would crunch the numbers and compare everything versus estimate, make the plan for the next day, do everything possible so that my margins were the highest. And I believe there's a significant amount of waste in the construction industry. So I want to show you one report. This comes from PlanGrid. They believe that there is 177 billion worth of labor costs and non-optimal activities in 2018. Now this was about as conservative as they could get, because in the same report they said that they felt like up to 35% of activities were not optimal. but this was more conservative. So if you take, this is based on the US, so if you have the US economy doing about $2 trillion in construction annual, this is close to 8% of waste that they estimate, which to me is conservative and an easy number. My experience is it's tremendously higher than that on average. And I'd love to know how you feel in the audience. Who feels like that's accurate or higher? Do you think it's higher than 8%, or you feel like 8% is about right?
I agree with you. I think it's higher.
You think it's higher? And you think it's close to what it is?
10 to 12, I'd say.
Kind of 12%? Okay. Anybody higher than 12? And, I know that's pretty subjective because there's a lot of different facets of construction. That's one of the complicated things, is there's so many different facets between the planning. Like, we could argue there's a tremendous amount of waste in the planning and the estimating process before we even start building. And that's, I'm a huge fan of measure twice, cut once, and in reality, the way I think is measure 4 times and cut once, because you can spend so much money once you get to the physical aspect of construction. So when you go through the supply chain of the process and supply chain, where you have the estimating process, the planning, the estimating process, and then the construction, which involves your subs and vendors and suppliers, I'd say you have a lot of opportunity. So we believe construction has a problem in the industry. And one of the biggest things we believe is that contractors don't have the information they need. And why don't they have the information they need? So another question for all of you, so I have another little bit of understanding. How many are from Canada? Do we have any out of Canada here? Any US? Well, I feel so alone. I'm from the US. So I'm from Utah, I'm from St. George, Utah, which, if any of you are familiar with the major areas near there, be Zion's National Park and Las Vegas. Las Vegas is about an hour and a half south of us, and Zion's is right near where we're at. So those are probably the major landmarks. So when I go through some of the US data, you'll have to forgive me that it's US data, but my guess is Canada probably has similar issues as the US. Okay, so some of the problems that we see that construction companies report is that it's a big effort to collect daily production reports. This is a big effort. That payroll's a hassle. And by the way, from Busy, our perspective, we sell to customers in the US, Canada, and many other countries in the world. So I get this feedback from a lot of construction companies across the world. Meetings are ineffective, job review meetings. A lot of variance from final numbers from the original bid. Hard to organize the teams and to schedule and operate within the budget. And they lose a lot of money typically on change orders, or it almost seems like nobody wins on change orders when you look at it. From the general to the sub, everyone, it feels like it's an entire fight. How many of you experienced at least one of these problems? A few of you? All of them? Yeah. Most likely all of them exist. The construction industry is a fascinating industry. We have such a complex industry because we're so networked. It takes so many trades. This is a monstrous building, but take just an average commercial building. What do we need to build that building? 30 to 50 trades? And then you add the suppliers and vendors and so forth. It's a networked industry, and it's got a lot of moving parts, so it's extremely complicated. These are not surprising at all. And coming from the technology world, I can tell you that the construction industry does lag behind in technology, but it has some of the greatest opportunities for improvement out of any industry, in my opinion. So let's take a look at the reports we've got from our customers on how construction reports daily activity. And I want to know how consistent this feels with what your experience is. So the information we got back from polling our customer base is that 56% of them report activity on paper. Another 14% are through text and email. About 22% use an electronic app. And this is not just US based, this is Busy's customer base. And then other 8%. Any thoughts or comparisons there? Do you feel like that's right or consistent with what your experience is?
We use a lot more text.
A lot more text and email? And you'll see that. There's actually another stat that shows that. So this project I told you about in southern Utah, it's called Tech Ridge, and we're working with a media company called Built Worlds out of Chicago. And what we are doing, and I'm going to say this to you just because there are a lot of owners in the room, owner builders and owner operators. What I'm doing is, as we go through this project, I'm actually requiring that it is a paperless project, that there is absolutely no paper used on this project. And the reason why is, how many of you do whatever effort it is? I mean, I'm sure you do this, but how many of you put serious effort on collecting data? Just collecting data from your projects. Okay? A few of you, and probably all of you to some degree, right? The reason I am so against paper is because paper does not produce a data trail. It does not give us a data trail, and that's typically where we get our information from. Typically, as we collect the data in, people turn in on paper, and then even the text and email usually is transferred from paper, and so it's really hard to aggregate and collect data trends. And so we don't learn a lot. And that's why on this project that I'm, I guess to a degree I've got the ability, because of being the owner and general manager on this project, to try out my own philosophies, you might say. But I also have a lot of exposure to the industry to see that. So we think that paper is probably the enemy of all advancement. You don't advance because you're not collecting the data and you're not monitoring trends. And I'll show you on the text, because you're right. A lot of people communicate that they use text, but this was specifically as to how they get reports of daily activity, which is a combination of the time they spent, like your time cards that come in, and what got accomplished on the job, if they even report that. So a new method that we want to talk about today is get clear and organized field data. We want to see the daily production notes accurate so that we can do the job costing. We want to see them accurate enough for job costing. We want to see budget versus actual. We want to see daily profit and loss, proof of safety, accurate labor codes, employee equipment productivity, photo documentation, all of these things, because we want it to drive data in our job sites. And that's the main thing. Like, if there's anything I would hope that you take away from this presentation today, in this class today, is focus on the data. You really need to focus on the data. In my opinion, there are two things that you need to run a successful construction business, and that is your systems and culture. And I recommend, depending on the size of your company, I know that when you're a small company it's hard to do this, but I recommend if your company is large enough that you have someone that focuses just on systems and someone else that focuses just on culture. And I know culture is a different topic. We're talking mainly about systems today, but for running a successful business, you need both systems and culture. And the reason I say have someone focus on systems is because what you need is to be passionate about getting the data. And when we talk about a smart job site, that's what we want. We want the data. So if you have someone in your organization, especially if you are at 50 employees or more, you should highly consider this. In my opinion, even if you were at 20, I would say this, but if someone's focusing on systems, that means someone is continually evaluating the systems and processes in your business and saying, what can I automate? What can I streamline? How can we take these monotonous tasks and make them automatic? And as you do that, you start collecting data. And that's what that person needs to have in mind is, how do I learn? How do we learn from job site, or building to building? Like, my friend up here on the apartment buildings, what did we learn the next time we go to an apartment building? What would we do different? And we don't know that if we haven't collected the data. So we just go from project to project. The reason I bring up culture, and this is a little bit of stray from my primary topic here today, is because we employ people. And so you need to also have someone that focuses on your people. And culture is all about how you make your organization feel. So if you want to retain the top talent that you have or attract the top talent that you don't have, which again, this is straight from the topic, you need to have someone also that focuses on your culture. The way the labor market is going, we're getting greater and greater shortage on skilled labor talent. How many of you have experienced that? Shortage for skilled labor talent. Do you have that problem as much as we do? I thought so. So culture is a big deal, and if you have someone that consistently focuses on system and culture, they will work together. And the other reason that this is kind of applicable to today's topic is because you'll find out as you try to shift to more data collection in your job site that the number one challenge you'll have is the resistance from your culture, from the people. If you've tried anything, you know that. The number one challenge you have is the change management. So you have to create a culture where people feel like they're thriving and growing. You're laughing. Have you had some of those problems? Generally, that is the number one thing we get. It is the number one thing. So if you're not familiar with Busy, we do time tracking because in my passion, we identified as labor was one of the greatest variables to the job site. And so you would not believe the stories that come back when people start trying to introduce this into their culture. Like, one person said, well, what Busy was for us was 2 months of hell, absolute hell, followed by heaven, because it took them that long to get it into their culture. We've had other companies that had almost destroyed them, almost entirely destroyed them, just because of what they discovered. So, and I bring this up because if you're going to focus on data, you've got to get comfortable with transparency. So one of the companies, the reason I almost destroyed them, they're in North Dakota, kind of near Canada, but, kind of north on the US. But so what they found out is that, what the owner found out is that his entire team of 25 people were meeting at the bar at the end of every day and spending a couple hours there before they clocked out, before they stopped the end of the day. So they're getting paid for this. And he just almost had a meltdown and almost fired his whole company and destroyed the whole thing. And they ended up recovering out of it. But it's transparency. Like, you're going to learn stuff, and you'll be surprised. Another company that we had out of Tennessee, so I won't give you any Canadian examples. Besides, Canada's nice, right? We don't have these problems. Another company we had out of Tennessee, they found out that their entire crew was clocking in and out, so they spent the entire day at a strip bar, a strip joint. It's amazing how that can impact productivity. So, anyways, those are more extreme examples, but basically, as you collect data, you'll discover things. And so you have to be comfortable with transparency. And this is my point of that. The technology that you're looking for, however it applies to your business, it doesn't have value unless it tells you the story. That's what collecting data is all about. It's about telling you the story of what's happening in your business. You can't do anything about your business if you don't have an understanding of what's happening. And so when we talk about smart data and collecting smart data, think of it like a health monitor on your body. If you didn't know what's going on, if you had no idea, when you go in the hospital, the first thing they do is hook you up with monitors so they can manage your heartbeat and all your vitals, right? But in our business, we don't put enough value on monitoring our vitals. And that's what we need to do. We have to, so like I say, if I can give you one thing to take out of here, is focus on smart data. Get the construction technology that helps you manage your vitals, and so it tells you the story. So I'll give you kind of some examples of that, and we have some close examples to you guys that can help you see how people are using this. The idea we say it's a big idea, but it's such a simple idea. It is simply, you need to get your information from the job site to your office, and then bring in your custom reports, however you do them, so that you have the vitals on monitoring your company. And I was in a panel discussion yesterday. We talked about different technologies and methods, and there's a lot of questions like, well, is there one technology that fits all? Should we be looking for one technology that fits all? The answer is mostly no. Most of the time, that is the wrong approach. Because most technology companies, they have a focus that they do really well at. Okay, I should have probably asked this earlier, but just in the audience, how many of you have smartphones today? Everyone, is there anybody that doesn't have a smartphone here? And how many use multiple apps? Like, you all use more than one app, right? It is not a big deal to use multiple apps. And in fact, you'll find that people that focus, when you're looking for technology that works for you, pick up technology that covers one system or process in your business. Like, if you have a monotonous process, you want to go for something that covers that. It's not that big a deal to change between applications. You got to look more at what it's bringing you as far as automating your systems. So you want to get your systems automatic like this. So it comes from the field, from your job site, to your office, and get your reports customized so that you can start monitoring your vitals. And we'll go into some of the trends in the industry, and this kind of connects with what you were talking about on relies on text. So construction technology comfort level. This is when we pull and we say, how comfortable are you? Well, even though we say the construction industry is behind on technology, and it is, and you'll find the resistance when you try to introduce it into your organization, they're actually not that uncomfortable with it. 87% of them rely on text. which really is awesome. I mean, text is a huge advancement compared to when we didn't have it. And 73% of them use apps. What we experience when we go introduce technology into a company is they'll say, oh, my guys can't use that. They can't figure that out. And then we go out into the field and the guys say, yeah, we can't use that. We can't figure that out. And then as we start working with them, they'll pull out their smartphone and they're great. They're savvy. They can do everything. What typically the resistance is most organizations really resist transparency for one reason or another. If you're going to start tracking and collecting data, you're going to move towards transparency, and you have to be comfortable with that. Now, on the positive side, I will tell you that we've also, it doesn't mean all your employees will hate it, and they will hate it up front just because every single person on the planet seems to hate change. Just about. I mean, there's progressive people that really want to see it. But once they get into it, then they find out the benefits of it. So this is just to let you know that they're using it, they're doing it. What you need to do is sell them on that. As you introduce change into your organization where we start changing technology, like say for instance, if you were going to use a daily report system or a digital time card system, you need to sell your employees on how that's going to benefit them. Because it's a what's in it for me kind of concept, right? So I can give you some of the reports we hear back from employees. We actually, believe it or not, gain customers from one employee quitting one organization and going to another organization and saying, hey, you guys should use this, you should try this. But it's after they've used it long enough to understand the benefits. So some of the benefit they get is also transparency. We have a lot of employees that love using our application because they say, it shows me the number of regular hours and overtime hours I'm supposed to get paid for, instead of me waiting till I get a paycheck to discover what my supervisor was tracking for me. So they get that transparency too. They start seeing, okay, I can kind of manage my own time, and I can start getting data on myself, and I know what to expect. That's one of the positive things. The other positive thing is if you can give them feedback on, hey, if you're a great employee and doing great things for us, just start communicating with us. You'd be surprised how many employees are dissatisfied because they work their hearts out for you and they feel like you never notice. So, just as you introduce technology, try to focus on the positives and how they'll benefit from it, because again, they're using the applications. So this is another poll from PlanGrid. And this is saying, how can construction improve data? What are the top 3 reasons for investing in field technology? These are the top 3 reasons companies are identifying to invest in field technology. Better access to project data or information, improving project productivity, and improving accuracy of project data information. And while we're on this, I want to give you one stat, and again, it's from the US, but you'll have to decide how much you think it compares to Canada. In the US, we have a consistency of 70% of construction companies in the US go out of business within 7 years. It's consistent as far back as the US Census is tracking the data. 70% of companies fail. And when I'm talking to a room like this, typically, no one believes they're going to be part of that failure rate. Like, yeah, it'll be someone else, won't be me. When you dig into the information, which Busy spends a lot of time doing, I personally spent 2 years researching this before the founding of Busy. What you find out is that none of the companies fail because they didn't know how to do their trade or skill set. Like if you're a trade worker, no company ever failed because they didn't know how to lay block or they didn't know how to frame buildings. Almost never. If it happened, we don't have any data sources on it. Every single one of them failed because they didn't have the information they needed to make good business decisions. Project data information, productivity information, they didn't have the information they need. That's the number one thing that causes failure in construction businesses. So focus on data, and I'm actually pretty excited to see that at least, with people that are polling for field technology, these are the 3 highest things they're asking for, because this is what drives success in your business. It's all about the data. Again, if you view yourselves, and you have a lot of large companies here, and so you may already view yourself this way, but if you view yourself as a business owner rather than a tradesman, you'll think like this. What are we in business for? We're in business to make money. And how do we make money if we can't make good decisions? And how do we make good decisions if we don't have the data? So again, a smart job site is what we're after to make the data. This is some of the trends we've seen. Construction companies start using our product, and by the way, I'm the CEO of Busy. In fact, to be honest with you, I wasn't even supposed to give this presentation originally. We had another gentleman that was going to give this presentation, and we ended up having to part ways with him, so they asked me to come fill in. So I apologize. I'm so passionate about construction systems, I'm probably not as much of a salesman as I should be for even our product, even though it's a fantastic product. But the data we get, what we discover with Busy is when we introduce it to them, often it's a vanguard technology because everybody needs to collect time, to track their time, to get paid. And your employees need that. And so we'll introduce it to them, and a lot of times what it does, it inspires them to start looking into other technology also. So it becomes the first implementation where they start doing that, then they implement more and more and more. And so they get kind of hooked on it. So what we've seen is this kind of profitability growth from customers, and it's when they implement these things. They start seeing their field user experience improve. They get their company easy to understand and adopt technology. They start getting the information from the reported job sites, improving their reports, tracking their cost codes, increasing project profit. All that sounds great, but there's definitely that, well, how does that work? And I'll show you how that works. They really do increase at this level, and a lot of them increase their overall growth at this level. And one thing I always ask people is, do you really want to grow 30%, or do you just want 30% more profit margin? Because growth usually comes with a headache, a lot of headache. So I would always recommend in your business, most people think, I just want to grow, I want more work. I'd recommend that you optimize your profit margins first and then grow, because
You can have more work and make less money.
you can. In fact, it's a great point. And anybody want to comment on that, the why you can have more work and make less money?
More risks.
More risks? Okay.
You grow outside of your capacity to do the work, or you're expanding your volume of work without expanding the capacity to do that volume of work.
Okay, so you grow beyond your capacity. And in the back, what did you have?
I think there's more waste as well, too.
Yeah, there's more waste. You're right. A lot of times what it is the company, when you'll find especially small business owners, like your trades, for a lot of you are generals, when they start out, the owner or the management team, they're pretty close connected, so they have a fairly good handle on it, right? And as they get growing, they don't have quite as good of a handle on it. So things become more and more vague to them. They're not quite sure, and so they start losing money. They're growing beyond their capacity. But I would also say one of the great reasons we've seen from our customer base is that they grow in the wrong direction. So they're, like, if you look at profitability, they're doing multiple jobs, and say they're making 5%. Is 5 to 10% somewhat decent company, right? Yeah, I agree. I'm not quite that excited about 5-10%, but 5-10% on average is a pretty decent company. But what happens a lot of times is they don't know where they're winning and where they're losing. So they can be making 20% margin on some jobs and losing 15% margin on other jobs, and they're making overall 5%. So they say, let's grow, let's double our profit margin. And then they grow in the jobs that they weren't making money on. And so they lose because they don't know where to grow. So when you start monitoring the health of your business and understanding your business, it also helps you understand where to grow and where to not grow. One of the favorite quotes of our customers I've ever heard is, he said, Busy helps me to understand the jobs we want and the jobs we used to think we want that we don't really want. Something to that effect. He said, they were able to discover, oh yeah, we don't want that kind of work. That work just drives us into the hole. So the first thing you need is information. So how do we use that information? This is what we call the construction triangle, okay? So when you do a project, we talked about this a little bit ahead of the meeting, you plan and estimate your project. You go through the planning process. If you're a tradesman, you're estimating a project someone else has planned. If you're in the general contractor space or owner space, you're creating this whole process. You're starting with the plan and creation of the estimate. And then as you go through the project, you go into execution mode, right? You estimated, and an estimate is really just what we think is going to happen. We estimate this project and we say, how do we think this is going to go? And again, the reason I focused on variables in Busy is because what's hard about the estimate is the variable. So back when I was doing land development, it's real easy for us to understand the materials cost. We have so much cost for pipe, so much cost for gravel and so forth. That's not hard to estimate. And it's not hard to compare at the end of the job. What's hard to compare is when I say, I think what it's going to take me to install 1,000 feet of sewer line is, 5 guys and a track hoe and a loader and, this kind of stuff. And how long does it actually take them? And so when we execute, what happens when we execute? How much do we track that data? How much do we collect and at the end of the job evaluate and say, did it actually go the way that I thought it was going to go? And you'd be surprised. Well, I don't know if I want to ask this question. You can answer if you want, but many companies, in our experience working with the construction industry, probably over 50% of companies at least do not evaluate. They don't do any sort of post-mortem evaluation on their project. Over 50% at least. And so this is going back to what I said in the beginning, why we've kind of declared war on paper, is we're saying, hey, paper does not collect data and it does not allow you to evaluate at the end of the project. We want to evaluate, like on the project that I have the ability to control, okay? We want to evaluate not only how one job went, but we want to evaluate trends from going from job to job or building to building. We want to know what's going on and how things are happening and identify decisions that we can make that can make things better. And so if you kind of get into this process where you think, okay, every time we plan, here's a plan, we're going to have an execution, and then we're going to have an evaluation or post-mortem meeting on it. And you take your management team and you have that post-mortem meeting. And if you're collecting the right data, then that's what the meeting becomes about, is we thought this was going to happen, things went down different than we thought it was going to go down. What can we do next time to make sure this doesn't happen again? And when we go to the idea of waste in the construction industry, it can also be one of those topics in your evaluation. How much waste do we think we had in this project, and are there opportunities for us to improve? And I realize, the diminishing scale of returns. Like, there's a point that it can be too much to try to track all that, but at least you should go through your evaluation and pick up the low-hanging fruit of what you can do to improve your business. And again, when we talk about people that have increased their profit margins substantially that start using our technology, it's typically because we simply get them in this mindset. It's not that our technology does everything for them, and we'll show you some examples of what they do. It's that it starts them in the process of collecting data, and then they get that data, and then they start making decisions and using that to change the way they're running their business. And then as they do that, to be honest, they get addicted. They're like, oh my gosh, what other systems and processes can we implement? And so I think other technology companies should pay us a royalty because we end up selling a bunch of other technology too, because we don't do everything, of course. Because we really do. We get them started on it, and it's exciting. It's exciting for me to see this whole process work. But again, everything in the construction industry should be done this way. These 3 simple steps is you estimate, you execute, and evaluate. And to hit back a little bit on the culture, this is where I always say systems and culture are the 2 key things, is you have to create the culture in your company that this is what we do. And why do we do this? So we can improve. And if we don't all want to improve, why are we working here? What fun is it to work for a company that never improves? So it just helps create a culture of thinking about it. So I want to show you an example of data. Okay, can everyone see the numbers on the screen okay? If you can't, I can go through it just a little bit for you. So this is data that's collected by one of our customers. Now, if we go from right to left, what they're looking at is they have October profitability. So they have a net revenue, and they have a net revenue per job. And by the way, that net revenue should be stated net profit. Net profit per job, and how much profit per ton, because this is an asphalt company that lays asphalt, okay? And so they look at their October productivity, how many tons they did, how many man hours it took to do that tons, and the amount of tons per man hour. All makes pretty good sense so far, right? We're just monitoring how things are going in our business. And again, these trends should be monitored whether you've done the estimate up front or not. Like, you should always be collecting data to monitor the trends in your business. But now let's go further. So what this company did was pretty interesting. They separated their company into Team Alpha and Team Bravo. Now, really what that represents is just the estimator. They just separated the jobs that they had 2 estimators in their company that are doing the estimates for this job, and they just separated the estimates and said, okay, how are jobs going from this trend to this trend? Okay? And so Team Alpha, according to this, has 7 jobs, 12,000 man hours, average man hours of $6.60 per ton, with a revenue of a loss of $5.86 per ton. Team Bravo has 17 jobs. They did 7,000 tons, 3.99 tons per hour with a net gain of $25 a ton. That seems pretty big swing of difference, right? And we go over here further to the right and we see their profitability. So Team Alpha basically, or no, this includes all profitable jobs. And down here we can see the Alpha Bravo. So, and all their profitable jobs, they figured they were making 400,000, and on their losses, they were losing 287,000. Okay? So their overall gain was 107. Now this seems like they could go ahead and make 400,000 on their project per month. This is actually not accurate. This is not quite accurate yet. And you can see the signs in the report if you dig into it. But this is wonderful. This is literally wonderful. Because what it did for this company is they started getting the conversation happening of the data. The reason I say this is not accurate is if you read into this report, you can see that there's costs and man-hours being allocated to the wrong projects. But they would never know that if they didn't start collecting the data. So this is a phased-in, and I show you this, it might seem like a bad example, but it's a great example. It's a phased-in process. You start collecting data, and you say, okay, the data's not coming in right. Well, why not? What are you doing? What's the different ways you can allocate the data? Maybe you're not communicating the information improperly to the office and so forth. Because what this revenue and profit loss was pulled for, just to give you an idea, this was pulled from their QuickBooks. This is pulled from their accounting system. This had nothing to do with us in the beginning getting them to collect data from the field. This is their accounting system. And if you're familiar with accounting processes, we're either very focused on financial accounting or managerial accounting. So they're doing their financial accounting that works for the tax for the governments, right? But it gives them absolutely no good information from a managerial point of view because they're not tracking it properly. So this just starts to show them. So their man hours actually probably were tracked pretty well as they start to bring in the process, but they start to identify, okay, overall we're making 100,000 a month, here's how we're tracking. They get these teams involved, and then they start honing in the data so that they can make sure it comes in accurate and they can make better decisions. So in the beginning, the first thing you need to do is pull in a health monitor. And I show you this which might seem like a bad example, because I don't want you to be surprised. When you start collecting data, when you start shifting towards a smart job site way of thinking, it's going to be evolution. You're going to start by collecting the data, then you challenge the data, then you make sure it's right, and you're shifting your whole company into cultural habits of collecting accurate data. And that goes to kind of the incentive of most of your company would like to see some sort of score. You'll find out when you start collecting the data, they would like to see some sort of scorecard. You know, oh, how did we do? If I'm team Alpha here, I'm going to argue this, right? Oh, that can't be right. That's not right. We didn't lose that much money per ton. There's no way we lost that much money per ton. Well, what does that do? It starts driving you towards the answer. Okay, well, what happened? What was the problem with reporting? How did that come in? And you start going through the process. And again, I bring up this for another reason for large companies. Let me shift to just a quick story, and this is not unusual. So working with one of the largest excavation companies in the Utah area, and I would put them in the top 2% of construction companies that do civil work. And so I go and meet with their top crews project manager. And I asked him, I said, okay, how many cost codes do you track against? Like, how are you tracking your information that's coming in? He says, oh, we do an amazing job of it. We are so precise. And I said, great, that's wonderful. So tell me, how are your cost codes coming in? He says, well, or how many do you use? And cost codes is just simply, to be clear on my terminology in case it's consistent or inconsistent with your experience. What I'm referring to as a cost code is a unit of measurement that they are tracking productivity against. Okay? So if it's square feet of asphalt, linear feet of pipe, square feet of tile, whatever that is, just something that they're tracking productivity against. He says, we have up to 140 cost codes per job that we track against. I said, wow, that's amazing. You're tracking that detailed, 140 cost codes per job. Then I asked him, I said, okay, so now tell me, because I've been in the industry and I understand this game, and I've even repaired live sewer lines, which I'm ashamed to admit, but I've been in the industry that heavily involved. Said, how many of those cost codes do your employees actually allocate their time to? He says 3. 3. And then we shift that data around to the rest of the cost codes to meet the budgets that we were given, right? So if you understand data, what just happened? Fabricated data. Absolutely fabricated data. So they're running this whole wonderful business, and on a macro level, they're running their business. And this is what this thing shows you. This company is a successful company. On a macro level, they're running their business fine. But the data that they're bringing in is so inaccurate that they don't have the ability to actually make smart decisions to come in and shift, how crews function and how productivity functions, how estimators function, because they're not bringing in data on that level. When he's saying we track as much as 146 or 140 cost codes, but only 3 of them actually get allocated time in the field, and then our supervisors move them over to fill up the budgets, you're just self-fulfilling the prophecy of the estimator. They have no idea what's going on. I mean, they thought this would happen like this, and every time you communicate back, yep, that's what happened, that's what happened. So that might seem inconsistent. So that was a company out of Utah. So I have another company that I work with in Colorado, another civil company. They do $150 million a year in annual revenue. They have about 300 employees, and they are unbelievably good, in their opinion, at tracking data, again, on a macro level. So I went and interviewed their teams too, and I followed the process for them. I followed the data. So I just went, on that estimate, execute, and evaluate process. I just followed it. So I went to the estimators, and I said, okay, how are you doing your estimates? How are you getting your data? So they do that. I go to the field. I look at how they track their data. And same exact thing. Went to the field representatives and found out that once they run out of a budget on one item, then they start moving all the labor to another item that has enough budget room in it so that they don't get penalized. Okay? And this comes back to the culture argument that I gave earlier. If your culture is that you will penalize them for telling you the truth, they will not tell you the truth. If these guys got red in their budgets, they got in big trouble. So they did not get red in their budgets. And you have to shift your culture towards, we want to collect accurate data. We want to collect transparent information so that we can have that data and we can start comprehending what's going on. And your incentives need to be based around that. And yeah, it'll expose a lot of problems, but in your culture, you have to be willing to take those and start dealing with them. But anyways, this is just a great example of that. Like I say, this is a successful company, a very successful company. I think they probably do. This is a company out of Oklahoma. I think they probably do, I don't know, just under 100 million annual, and this is just one of their divisions. But this shows the topic we talked about earlier. On a macro level, they're doing fine, and so they don't see the opportunities they have for waste that we were talking about. So let's look at how that works, kind of. We have a company, and this is our labor, because it all goes down to where do you collect the data from? Who's giving you the data? Where's it coming from? So in most cases, you're collecting the data from your employees or your supervisors on the job site. And again, when I evaluated this company in Colorado, that's what I did. I went around to their estimator, their supervisor, their employees, and then back to the estimator to see what happened. And what happened with the company in Colorado was fascinating. When I went to the employees and the supervisors, and they were just filling up the budgets, right? Then I go back to the estimator, and I say, okay, you're collecting all this data. How are you using it? He says, oh, we don't use that. I don't think it's right. So I just call the crews and ask them. It's like, well, you guys are going through all this effort to collect data, and you're not using it. Anyways, in their case, and again, when I say collect data, that's probably being generous. They weren't collecting very good digital data. It was the whole paper system that we've been talking about. And so on a macro level, they were working, but on a quality of data basis, it wasn't working. So this is kind of an example. Your employees go in, he excavates the retaining wall, has lunch, and he digs the footing over here. And he says, I have 8 hours for the day in excavation. This look kind of familiar? I mean, whatever trade it is, doesn't matter. So the problem here is, of course, obvious. If I'm the estimator, I have no idea if I estimated the retaining wall right versus the footings because there was no difference on that collection. And of course, there is, the challenges with doing that, but the benefits outweigh the challenges so heavily that it's amazing. So if you look at that again, what opportunity is there to evaluate? We basically didn't give the estimator an opportunity to change and adjust his bid according to what's actually happening. So when we talk about what's smart in a job site, Specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and timely. This is the data that we need. All the data that we're collecting needs to have these characteristics. And I'm sure everyone in this room has heard the adage where it says, you can't manage what you don't measure. And yet we typically don't measure very well. We typically don't measure things. And going back to it, again, the smart job site tells the story. That's one way you can just identify whether you have a smart job site or not. Is it telling you the story? Are you getting the information to make your decisions? So let's look at kind of the idea of documenting a smart job site. So we want them to document conditions and measure production. And I'll jump back to the St. George job for a minute with this. So this is just an example. So someone explains and says, okay, the weather was dry today, materials were delivered late, generator broke down, and here's what we accomplished today. Now, in this case, you know, he's saying we installed this much sewer, and not that the sewer guys would do drywall too, but of course they're making an example for us. And we installed drywall in 23 rooms, and we're mudding tomorrow. That's great, and in this case that's enough because we're collecting their labor data separately so we can just pair it up. And so that tells us, because this information has no value if we don't know what resources it took to get that information. And the same if you're collecting the resources that took to do the job but you don't know what they accomplished, it doesn't have any value either. It's like in the project in St. George I referred to, because in this case I'm the managing partner, when I'm telling the subcontractors, I'm saying, if you're going to work on this job, you're going to commit to give us a certain amount of data. And the data that we're asking for, and by the way, we're being very generous too, like we're being transparent. We're saying, here's the building and here's what you should bid. Here's your scope of work, which oftentimes we don't do because we're worried about CYA. You know, the architects, the builder, the owner, and the sub, we're all worried about CYA, so we fight everything. We're taking a new concept. We're just saying, here's your scope. This is what you have in the building. Here's how many square feet of tile you have, etc. Bid it. Bid it according to what we told you. And if we're wrong, tell us we're wrong. So that on the next building we learn from that and we go back to the architect and we say, why were we wrong? We gave them the scope. I mean, doesn't it blow your minds that we still have contractors do their own takeoffs? I mean, we talk about waste in the construction industry. You hired an architect that you spent a tremendous amount of money with, that knows all the details down to the very last piece of data of what that job site needs, and then you hand it to a guy and you say, well, you figure it out yourself. Spend 2 weeks doing that. You know, generally that adds to our waste and our overhead. So what we're doing different is we're saying, here's your scope, bid it. Secondly, if you're going to work on this project, here's what we require. We want to know every day how many men you had on job site, what of those scoped pieces that we gave you they were working on. We want their time allocated, man hours to each those scoped pieces, and what work you accomplished, end of every week. We want that data at the end of every week. Why? Because it helps us monitor things. What's important to the owners? I mean, the owners in the room. What's mainly important as we build a building? It's typically schedule, quality, and price, right? That's the main important things. Overarch that with safety, and you pretty much have it. So we're saying if we can monitor that level of data, we can watch trends, we can see as schedules get off, because as we're collecting in that data by week, that we know the production level versus the man-hour level. Then if we see production falling behind of what it should have been on schedule, we get to see if they were allocating the man-hours that they should have been allocating. And if that's why it's falling behind schedule, in other words, gives us data. And so we're literally saying, if you can't report to us on a weekly basis as the general contractor owner, you cannot be on this job site. So the smart job site, easy. The reality is, yes, once you get in the habit of it. Like I mentioned earlier, 2 months of hell, heaven after that. Once you get in the habit of it, it's actually easier than what you were doing. But in the beginning, change is never easy. So we go into this process again. Excavation, 8 hours from micro. This is the wrong way, right? We went through this. Retaining wall, break, footings, dig. Daily reports are actually simple and quick, so what should it look like? Well, and this is an example of our application and what they can do. So we know, because we're tracking the time, where the hours were allocated per the man and machines. We know that. And then we simply need the report that comes in. And as you watch how this report comes in, you'll see it's kind of standard. There's always problems, right? There's always something that happened. You know, Sam was late, held up with the water truck, things didn't work out, weather, whatever the case is, this is how much production that we got, right? That's not that hard for them to do. Because one of the things you'll get in the resistance from your team is they'll say, oh, that's a lot more effort. Really? Is it really that much more effort? I mean, isn't that the focus of your whole job anyways, is to get this stuff done? Like, can you just tell us what you got done? So I want to give you an example of a real application and how this is working in different businesses. Now, again, you know, I'm more familiar with US companies, even though we do have a lot of companies in Canada, but I'm more familiar with US companies. So they did this as a tale of two Bens, just because ironically they were both named Ben, okay? But one is in Salt Lake City, which is not as big of a metro as New York. And that's why they did the comparison, is they're saying, hey, because it's a very different thing to build high-rise buildings versus build, more sprawling construction. So how do they use smart job site data? In this case, he's an exteriors contractor, exterior finishes, and he was able to run a lean organization. So he has 60 plus employees and he has 2 people in management in the office. Another benefit you can get is just increase capacity or decrease your overhead when you start using data. And I know that scares some people. When they say decrease their overhead, they're like, oh wait, is my job going to be at risk? Not if you have a culture that, you just become more productive and either take on more capacity or shift to doing more and more things. But technology will make you more efficient. So they were able to do more jobs in less time. They can calculate trouble early in the job and then increase profit and reduce loss. Now, I want to give you one example of how that worked. So I know this customer directly. He's one of his jobs is a mason. Any of you familiar with how much you have to pay masons these days to get anything done? I mean, masons are extremely expensive right now. So when Ben started evaluating his projects and started collecting data, what he found out is he was tracking the data. He simply separated them installing product versus setting up scaffolding. That's all he did. He just said, tell me how much time you're installing product versus setting up scaffolding. What he quickly discovered was that he was paying masons a tremendous amount of money to set up scaffolding, and a lot of it. And because we pay them overtime, then it ended up adding to their overtime at the end of the week. So here he's paying them, I don't know, probably $30 an hour, we'll say. But he's actually paying $45 an hour to set up scaffolding because it ends up pushing these guys into overtime. And so all he did was a simple change. He simply started subbing out the setting up of scaffolding to an outside resource that used far cheaper labor. Saved him well over $100,000 a year. I think it was a few $100,000 a year, because he just shifted his resources to working on what he was actually paying them for and the cost he was paying. And again, it's just about getting the data. Once you start getting the data, you can make the decisions. This other gentleman, this is closer to you. New York's not too far away from here, so I'm sure they have very similar problems and similar challenges. This was a very fascinating person. And as much as I would like to take credit for this, really I would, it was simply because he was aggressive about using data. So all we did is started introducing to him a way to collect his data. So he started out with, I think he had just over 30 employees, and he was doing $15 million in annual revenue. Okay, and he's doing primarily remodels. He's doing primarily remodels. So he started with 15 employees, doing about, or 30 employees, about $15 million in revenue, and he just started collecting his data. So he found out he could manage a lot more business and he could make a lot better decisions. If you look at the last line, he was able to reduce his cost from $20,000 to $15,000 per room. So remember we talked earlier about the waste in the industry? So depending on which way you do that math, 25% or 33% waste. If you started at the 15, it's 33% more. So he was able to reduce his cost on his remodels per room by this percentage. And at the same time as he was able to collect this data, he just started growing. And so in the last 2 years, he's gone from 30 employees all the way to 200 employees. And I'm not recommending that for everybody. Normally that's suicide. But in his case, it wasn't. He nailed his process, he nailed the systems and management, and started increasing his productivity now in a profitable fashion. And so he was able to expand his business. And so we talked, in the beginning of this session about growth. If you grow understanding your data, if you grow understanding the story of what's happening in your job site, if you grow understanding your health metrics, you'll be fine because you know how to grow. If you grow just because it sounds exciting to grow, then you're probably going to end in disaster. I'm extremely familiar with companies that do that. It's like, I got $1 million project. I got $1 million. I got awarded $1 million contract, so I got $1 million coming. It's like, well, actually, if we break down your bid to what your potential margins are, what money do you actually have control of? That's usually where most people mess up, is they look at the gross volume dollars instead of the net dollars and what they have control over, and they lose on growth. So again, this is all it was. Starting with the job site data, collecting it, making sure we're getting the right job site data to the office, and making sure we bring it into reports that, again, you customize according to your systems and processes, whatever is your systems and processes. We at Busy have suggestions we make, but they're suggestions based on general application. And so, customers will end up taking the data and starting to move it according to the best ways they understand to do business. So the panel I was on yesterday, and I've kind of touched on a little bit today, we talked a lot about adopting technology. It's literally the greatest challenge. When we evaluate the industry, the greatest challenge is just shifting the mindset to this. Almost everyone will agree it's right. We need to do this. We need to collect more data. But shifting the mindset to this is really tough. So we want to talk to you about steps of tech adoption. Okay? So in your organization, this is what we recommend. First, create a rollout plan. And this kind of goes back to what I said earlier on systems and culture. You should have a person working on systems and a person working on culture if your company is big enough. If it's not big enough, my high recommendation is you work on systems and you work on culture. That is just that important for you. So you create a rollout plan of how you're going to introduce systems into your organization. And part of that plan is you should identify all the mundane or monotonous processes that you do that are not focused on productivity. So if you want to write this down, what should you systemize first? It's every process that does not directly increase your throughput or increase your productivity. Everything. If you're collecting data, if you're doing something like, I can use the time cards from the field. If I'm spending 15 minutes a day going to get time cards from the field, that does not increase my productivity. Systemize that. Everything. Your bookkeeping, you name it. Systemize every process you can. Because what you're after is to get all other things systemized, your health monitoring in place, so that all your focus is on throughput. How do I increase my throughput? How do I increase my field productivity? So create your rollout plan. Create your rollout plan focusing on increased productivity, and how do we systematize everything else possible. And of course, you want to systematize the data you're collecting that influences productivity. Second thing is train in the organization your leaders first. Change in an organization needs to come from the top down, and the leaders have to embrace it. And again, just referencing a little bit back to the seminar from yesterday, people have often said to us, well, we have these veteran workers that really don't want to change, but they have the trade skill knowledge that we really need, so we want them to do it, and we need them and we rely on them so that we can't do it. And one of the suggestions we make is if you have your veterans and then you have your newbies that are coming in, it's really great if you can identify some of the newer people that might be more technology savvy. A lot of times we refer to them as the millennials, which, if you want to refer to them that way, great. I'm just barely older than that generation. I don't think it's just for millennials. I flipping love technology. Anything that will get me information. But if you have people in your company that are really great at information gathering, data gathering, then you have your veterans that are really great at their skill set. What we've seen other companies do is they pair them together. They say, okay, we want the veteran to basically teach the new person coming in the trade skills, and we want the new person coming in to help and assist the veteran in documenting, identifying, and using technology to start documenting their job site, because usually that's what they're good at. And you have to be able to sell that to them in such a way that makes neither one feel threatened. Like the veteran can feel threatened, like, why should I teach them everything I know? Then I'm not going to have any work. In today's economy, you say, no, there's a labor shortage. Like, you will always have work. We just desperately need you to collect data, so we're going to have this, this young person tag along with you and try to help with that to keep you focused on production. So team organization leaders first. Get your teams on board so that, from the leaders to their teams, try to get them on board. Again, try to sell it. And then work with them so that you're talking to your team about okay, here's what we're doing. We're shifting to this technology. We're shifting to a smart job site. Here's why we're doing it. Here's how it's going to benefit you. Get them on board, and then start getting feedback from them. You know, open up the dialogue and have the conversation, because they'll tell you. They'll tell you what they like or don't like about it and what worries they have, and then you can address those worries. You know, hopefully they're all legitimate worries. Typically we find that when we have this conversation, oftentimes we'll go in and help companies introduce it to their employees. We have this conversation with them. The employees end up not fearing it as much as they did up front. They end up kind of getting on board with it once they see that it could actually do benefit for them. And then I will, well, I guess I'll finish this first and then go into it. So you get their feedback, fix the problems or concerns they have, make sure you address them. I mean, you know, in the examples I gave you earlier that were funny, if they said, hey, we go to the bar every night, we don't want to stop doing that, and we like getting paid for it, you know, that's a little harder conversation to have, and I don't know if anybody would actually tell you that, but at very least they're going to know that's coming, like that's coming to an end. I got to stop doing that because I'm now going to work in a transparent atmosphere. Ongoing maintenance and training. Again, you know, these projects we're pushing on, we actually took a person and said, okay, we hired a person specifically for this job site and said, this person will help implement technologies into, well, in our case, even the subs we bring in. Like, and I'm referring to the project that I'm the project manager of in St. George. I've said, okay, we're hiring this person to implement technology, and they're just always going to help implement it. So ongoing maintenance and training. Most of the time in your culture, if you're training people, they actually feel more valued anyway, so it has another benefit. But you want to have an ongoing kind of plan that continues to maintain and train people. And that's why I recommended someone on systems, someone on culture, and if you're small enough, you do it, probably do it yourself. But lastly, if you want to talk about the adoption of technology, how many in this room are familiar with the term called the law of diffusion of innovation? Anybody? Have you ever seen the Simon Sinek videos? Anybody in this room ever seen Simon Sinek? There's a Simon Sinek video that's called Start with the Why. I highly recommend you watch. It's a TED Talk, about 19 minutes long. It's incredible for a different reason, but it's incredible. But anyways, what he explains is this is not just technology, it's any idea. When you introduce change or a new idea to a market, which that's what you're doing when you introduce it to your team, is you always have to start with the right people first if you want the idea to take hold. And he'll explain it in this video, but he explains it from a marketing perspective. But if you watch this, I want you to also think of it from an implementing technology into your company perspective, because it's the same way. He says basically in the population segment, and this works for a whole population, it works for a small crew in a company, you have the innovators. The people of the population that are typically innovators are about 2.5% of the population. Then you have the early adopters, which make up another 12.5% or 13%, I believe, somewhere around that. Then you have the early adopters, which make up about 34% of the population. Then you have the late adopters, which make up another 34%. Then you have the laggards, which make up about 15% of the population. The reason this is important, and I'm glad that nobody said they had a flip phone today, so I don't have to make anybody feel bad about being a laggard. But if you think of, just think back, 5 years ago, how many people didn't have a flip phone? Or 10 years ago, how much smartphone adoption did we have? So a smartphone is basically an example of this concept. It gets introduced to the market. The first people that get it are the people that are just real excited. They always get the latest and greatest technology. Those are the innovators or early adopters. They start using it. The early majority, which follows the early adopters, they're the people that see what they're doing and they say, oh my gosh, that's cool. How did you do that? And then they start following. The late majority are the people that come online when everybody's kind of doing it. And the laggards are the holdouts. They're literally your holdouts. So I want to give that to you in an example of introducing it to your company. So if you go into a company, your own company, and you say, you know what I'm going to do to test this technology? I'm going to introduce it to the person who is the most technology resistant in the company. If it works for him, it'll work for everybody. Yeah, that's wrong. You'll just shut the whole process down. You literally have to start first with the people who are excited about it. They will then demonstrate the value proposition it has for your company, and they'll bring the other people online because you just have to start it in the right way first. You start with your innovators, early adopters. You identify them by they probably have the latest and greatest smartphone. They're always talking to you about technology. They're always, they're that person. You probably know that person. They might even stand in line at Apple when they release the latest smartphone because they're so excited about what's coming. Those are your early adopters. And this is, again, why we talked about pairing an early person or a young person with a veteran, is you can get that early adopter to kind of show them. So if you start there and move through your company, you'll be able to implement this change. And so the law of diffusion of innovation is just about introducing a new idea to a marketplace. And I wish I had put that slide on here for you, but I didn't today, or someone else had prepared this presentation for me. But you'll see it on the Simon Sinek video, or you can Google the law of diffusion of innovation, and you'll kind of see how that works. But if you introduce that into your company, you'll have a successful path. If you just shotgun blast it or introduce it to the laggards first, you'll probably get enough resistance that eventually you'll give up, because they'll just fight you every step of the way. And so even in a small company, we brought in an electrician into our office, electrician company. They had 15 employees, so not a big company. You wouldn't think you'd have that division of people in that small of a number, but we did. We had it. So we put them around our conference table, we fed them lunch, and we introduced technology to them. So we literally just set up their company real quick, and we text them all their username and password for their app. Like, this was the first test we did, just for fun. So they got the text, and 2 or 3 people in the room, a couple guys and a girl, they see the link. It's got a link to the App Store. They click on the link. They download the app. They sign in with their username and password, and they start using the app. That's an early adopter. It really was no big deal, and it really isn't any big deal. So they start doing that. Then the people that were sitting next to them, they literally did this. They literally looked over their shoulder and said, "Wait, how did you do that?" They're like, "Oh, it's just like this and this and this." So they came on. And so they're kind of the early majority. So we got like half the room on. Then the other guys came on, late majority, as people were doing it. Then we hit the laggards. This is true. There was literally 2 or 3 guys in the room that said, "I have a flip phone. I can't do that. We can't do this process." But by this time, where 12 out of 15 of the employees had already got on and said, "Hey, this is cool and we like it," then the boss said to the laggards, he says, "Well, you're going to have to get a smartphone. This is how we're going to start doing things." And basically it was the pressure of everybody else coming on that really kind of challenged them to be able to make that shift. Because it's hard to shift the laggards. Okay, this is just, we're going to go into a Q&A session right after this, but this is just if you want to learn more or have any help with this process, BusyBusy has teams that can help you with this. So you can go to our website, of course, busybusy.com, and you can, of course, call and talk to one of our teammates, and they can help you get started on that process. And of course, we BusyBusy only do part of what I've talked to you about today. We only do the data collection for the time and attendance from the field and some of the productivity. All the other technologies will kind of evolve from there, and we can certainly give you advice on technologies you're looking for, but it won't all be with us. So I want to open it up for questions from the audience now that you've kind of had, I've kind of puked on you all today about my passion for smart job sites. Any thoughts or questions? Okay.
I was going to say, collecting the data is great, but we all have, legacy systems that we're working with, accounting, whatever. How did you find the process of most companies of transferring that data into those systems?
Yeah, from that. So it depends on the data you're trying to address. A lot of people have that exact same problem. Most of the time, that's not as big a deal as it seems to be. So like today, for instance, so I'm going to use time cards as an example because that's what I'm most familiar with. If you're collecting the time from the field, if you were collecting it today on paper or daily time cards or reports, how does it currently get entered into that legacy system? Probably from some manual process, right? And so all the technology will do is it'll pull that data in and aggregate it for you and make that manual process easier so that it's all aggregated, quick and easy to put into your legacy system. Now, depending on the system you're using, BusyBusy and many other technology companies, we have, CSV imports, exports that'll export into that system. And in some cases, we have direct connection links that'll link into that system. It kind of depends on how legacy it is. So all your technology, and I would highly recommend this, that you evaluate your company always on how well those legacy systems are serving you or not serving you. If they're serving you, great. You kind of work with them as you evolve. And I definitely wouldn't eat the elephant all at once. Take one process like you're talking about and fix that process. If it's time collection, now you're getting the time from the field to the office automated. And so you get the person who's normally entered into the legacy system to start doing it that way. And as you go through the process, if you identify your legacy system isn't quite serving you, then evaluate whether you want to go to another legacy system or another accounting system, I mean. Yes?
In terms of cost, is it subscription-based or is it a one-time purchase? Or?
For Busy?
Yeah.
Busy is just subscription-based. So it's an average of $10 a month per employee. So, and a lot of that's, sorry to expound a little bit more on that, but a lot of technology systems you look at, technology is really cheap like that. It's extremely cheap, especially the new technology. Most of them are subscription-based. And to a degree, you really want that. And if you don't mind me ranting a little bit about that, the reason you want subscription-based is a subscription-based company that didn't lock you into a legacy system or lock you into a contract. They're always motivated to win your business continually. Because like in our case, in Busy's case, you can cancel any time. We don't have any contract on you. You can use it, you can stop using it, and then we lose your business. So what it does, it makes us motivated, and every other technology company like us, to continually impress you, to continually give you good customer service, to continually take care of you and innovate for you. A lot of the legacy systems, the challenge with them is that they've kind of stopped innovating because they've got such a captive audience that they're just kind of milking that cow till it dies, And so, and again, just by the point you brought up, if I was evaluating technology for you and helping you evaluate different technology companies, I would look for subscription-based companies because they're forced to innovate to continue to win your business.
What's the cost of Busy?
It's about $10 a month per employee. So that's on average what it costs. So it's pretty inexpensive. And I love when, I hope or wish someone in this room would tell me that was expensive. No. So I would just ask you, how much does your employee cost you that you're managing? Because being as this session is all about data management, anybody want to give me an average of the typical cost of employee for this area in a month? Like average cost, is it $5,000, $6,000 a month, $4,000? $6,000, $7,000 a month average cost? Okay. See, that's what I'm saying is, and just like Busy, you'll find most of the technology out there is cheap. I would hardly worry about the price unless they're real extreme. I would focus very much on what technology you think you can implement into your company to solve those processes, because it's the change management that's going to be the most expensive to you. It's not going to be the technology. It's implementing the change. So find technology that matches what you're trying to accomplish and focus on that. You'll almost always discover that the ROI is worth it for the cost. Technology is so cheap these days.
So this subscription, this is required only for the site supervisor?
What's that?
This app is required for the site supervisor,
the
project managers, or the laborers as well?
It works both ways. We in a perfect world, all the employees track their own time because that's the most accurate data you can get if they're doing their own thing. But we understand a lot of times people prefer to have the superintendents track their time. So we've got the app set up to work both ways.
So the employees use their own phone tab?
Most of our customers, that's what they do.
So they just download the app, and then as they check in and as they do their activity, they sign in on their own.
Yep, it does that, and it lets them to sign off and say they weren't injured and say their time's right and all that kind of stuff.
So does the company compensate them for using their phone, or how's that?
Some companies do. Some companies will. It all depends on organization to organization. What we always recommend is there's two sides of the coin. If you really trust your employees, and it's great, and I think you should, that's a better culture, then they typically will give them like $5, $10, $20 a month stipend just to say, hey, we know you're going to use your phone, and we appreciate that, so we're going to give you a small stipend. It's not like we're going to pay for your whole phone because we know you're not going to use that all for us, but you're going to use a little bit of time on our app, and we want to make sure you're taken care of. And most employees typically appreciate that. So, and the ones I'm dealing with, it's usually kind of like what do they call it? I lost the word. It's like a stipend, but it's not quite a reimbursement. It's per diem. Thank you. Thanks. A lot of times people do a per diem type. Any other thoughts or questions?
Does it help in let's say finding out the OEE, which is the overall equipment effectiveness? or not?
Overall equipment effectiveness, and what kind of equipment are you specifically referring to?
So I'm talking in general. So there's some data you can collect and you can figure out this OE doesn't matter if it's
Sure.
it's a mechanical or electrical, civil or something. That really doesn't matter. It can be applied even in the office.
Right.
So
But-
collecting this data from field or office or manufacturing plant. Does it help in that, or can
Yeah.
you build that if we ask you to do that?
Simple answer is yes, it does. And the reason it does is because first what it does is collects the data of the person and the machine they were using. And so basically you just have to make sure that you're collecting from them the work accomplished, which we allow to be done in our app through their notes. But as long as you're collecting work accomplished, then yes, it measures the equipment efficiency because you're measuring the equipment they used and the time they spent on it to accomplish that data.
Is there a free trial right now? Just try it out for like a 30-day or 21-day sort of thing on that?
Yeah, thanks for the question because it's so important to us. Busy shifted our entire business model a couple of years to have a freemium to premium offering. And the reason we did that ties to a lot of what I've been saying today, is we identified that the hardest problem you have is to integrate it into your company. And so we gave a free version that allows you to get your company using it and to get everybody trying it and working out. And the difference between free and paid is just the data that you collect. So on the paid version, it gives you better reports, but the free version will give you enough reporting that it'll exceed your old processes anyways, but it just allows you to kind of move into it.
Also, there's a 90-day guarantee on the pro version in addition to the free.
Yeah.
So we basically take the approach of daring people to try it, where we say, look, we know your business will be better if you use this, so we pay you to try it, and we'll give you every dollar back 90 days later if you don't feel like your company's in a better spot.
Yep, in general, most people that get real serious about it, they go to the pro version right off the bat because it's pretty cheap anyways, like we talked about, and so they'd rather just start getting into their data and help them get into their data. And we're pretty optimistic, so we offer them, if it's not working for you, we'll give you your money back in 90 days, like Derek said. And typically, we don't have a lot of people that end up asking for their money back. Our churn rate's pretty low. Most customers stick with us.
Do you specialize in GCs, subcontractors? Where's your focus?
It's primarily anybody that is tractor paid by the hour. So if the GC, it's just if you're collecting data, say that they're on, I guess better way to say it is if it's a self-performing GC, it's usually more of a fit. If the GC is mainly a company that hires subcontractors, usually it's more of a fit for their subcontractors because it's managing hourly labor is what it's really collecting the data from.
Is the app available in different languages?
It's available in English and Spanish today.
Got to get that French going.
Yeah, we need to get that French going. We have a lot of customers up here, but we haven't had that much requested yet.
It's for sure a smaller market, I would think, for you.
Yeah, but our intent is to continue to expand the languages just based on the demand. So we'll continue to expand it.
You guys provide training when you buy this app and come to the office for training, or just?
We do. We provide various levels of training depending on what your company needs. So they can either do, pretty inexpensive training packages online, or, they can go all the way up to having someone visit their site and help them implement it into their team. So we do provide all levels. Any other thoughts or questions? This is obviously my passion, so I could talk to you all day about it, but I don't want to hold you up, and you're a wonderful audience, and I appreciate it. And anybody that has any questions for me afterwards that you'd like to ask, I'll be here for a while, just kind of wrapping up and stuff. So thank you very much. Appreciate your attendance today.